Storyville. I'm sure all of you all have heard about Storyville. You'll go out to learn a little bit more about it. Originally, this is the title for it, and as I was doing my research, I realized that there was a term, JASS, J-A-S-S, which is a slang term for sex. So I thought maybe I ought to retitle it JASS and Jazz. But then my wife said, no. So, then into a higher order, here we are in Storyville. Prostitution in Louisiana, it's ingrained. It goes back a long, long way. And in fact, it's been here since the very beginning. Unlike England, where England was torn with religious strife and civil wars and such like, and there was a lot of drive for individuals to leave England to settle in the New World. They didn't have that in Louisiana. France under Louis XIV was pretty stable and people loved it. So in order to get people to come here, they had to force them. So a lot of times they would go into the prisons and grab salt smugglers and vagabonds. And when they came to the ladies, they often resorted to the streets and picking up prostitutes. So as a result, many of the original migrants were prostitutes forced under Antoine Crozat and John Law. Harding Carter has a book out where he references that and says, you know, a lot of people trace their origins back to the first families. He says we can only assume that the Philip de Cassette under the Ursulines were very fertile and the prostitutes weren't. So anyway, you have Governor Jean-Baptiste Lamotte de Cadillac, and I love his quote, believe me, this whole settlement is not worth having. Given an opportunity, all would run away. If I sent away all the loose females, there'd be no women left here at all. In 1803, we have the Louisiana Purchase. Now that's when we take Louisiana from, well, Spain, France. It kind of oscillated there for a second. And Americans had been flowing in for quite a while. And the ones that were coming in were considered cane tucks. These are the guys on the keel boats and the river boats. When they hit New Orleans and they got paid off, they partied. So they were looking for a good time. So as a result, after the Louisiana Purchase, when it becomes an American city, more and more traffic is starting to come in, and the customer base is increasing. The Swamp was the original area. It was backed by Girard and Robinson, and it was referred to as a jumble of cheap dance halls, brothels, saloons, cockfighting pits, and rooming houses. Often, if you went in there, you didn't come out, depending how strong you were. Scene of 800 known murders between 1820 and 1850, likely more because a lot of people were just murdered, dragged in the swamp, and thrown in the bayous. As I said, a band to drink a woman was 6 cents. Prices have gone up. This is fleecing a John. This is the reputation it had. You know, a gentleman would be standing here talking to the ladies, engaging them. Well, this one's got a hand in his pocket taking his wallet. That was kind of notorious activity then. The origins of Storyville, in 1857, the Lorette Ordinance was passed. The idea being there was so much prostitution in the city that they decided if they control it, they would tax it. So in 1859, it was declared unconstitutional because one of the Marins paid the fee, which was $250, which was a sizable amount of money back then, paid it, then went to court, filed suit, and had it declared unconstitutional. So basically, it made prostitution illegal, but it didn't affect her business, and she didn't have to pay the fees. So she was quite happy with that arrangement. By this time, people started moving out of the swamp and moving more into closer to the port, the city of New Orleans. And now the trade went to Gallatin Street. I don't know if you know where Gallatin is, but Gallatin's that little place opposite where the flea market is at the end near the mint. To the little area there. There's incredible violence in that area. I mean, even the police didn't go in there unless there was a group. When the police didn't make it happen, they could go in there at night. They would go during the day and pick up the bodies and the people that were beaten. It was an incredibly brutal place. They had the Live Oak Boys operated a gang there where they would just walk into places and just beat people up. So it was an incredibly difficult place that was notorious really throughout the country. As people came down there, daddies would tell their sons, don't go to Gallatin Street, whatever you do. In the 1800s, women of ill repute started operating throughout the city, and in practically every neighborhood, a brothel was starting to build up. Just starting to appear. That people would rent a house to someone, the next thing it turned into a brothel. Smoky Row was another area between Burgundy and Canton and Danville. where you didn't walk down the street without being accosted. So it had become quite open in the activities. So a new area started popping up, and it's interesting that Basin Street, there was a South Basin Street, which was on the other side of the canal, and that's where the first upscale cat houses, if you want to call them that, or brothels, Kate Townsend, Minnehaha, I love that, Minnehaha, claimed she was an American Indian, and she had pictures of Hiawatha in her place, and Hattie Hamilton. And these were now first-class operations. A lot of money was spent. And in fact, it got spread around so much that people were upset, but the city fathers were spending a lot of time there. So it makes it a little difficult to control something when they're involved in it. In fact, they decided that the people were very angry, decided to do something about it. This is Gallatin Street, an early shot. There's some other shots of Gallatin. So you can see it's a kind of a seamy place, because inside all these doors and everything, there are going to be dance halls and bars and brothels on the second floors, and narrow alleys, dark alleys. So it was a pretty tough neighborhood, as you can possibly see here. This was the mascot. It was first published in 1882. It was kind of Llewellyn's version of the National Enquirer, but it just goes to show you attitudes, though. Because here you have a situation about prostitution running rampant in the streets. Here you have a double, and you have a family holding on to the dog as he's shielding her eyes, and he's hugging her, looking askance. This one's laying inside with a head covered, the little toy doll down here. But here you have an operating brothel. They're bringing a masked girl on the inside and other women hanging out. And that's what was actually starting to happen. It was just starting to appear in people's neighborhoods, people becoming angry. This next one, you also see the issue of drugs. You not only actually had heroin, but mostly it was opium dens that were coming in. So here's a young lady lured into the opium, and from there she ends up in prostitution. So this is the temper of the times as people were talking about what was going on. So the first houses on Basin Street were actually on south of Canal Street. There was Hattie Hamilton. She met Senator, I love that, Senator James Barnes, a Reconstruction politician. They took over an old brothel. She turned it into a palace with his money and with his connections. They filled it. So finally one day they had an argument. She shot him. There was a black butler that was there. They initially tried to blame the butler. They called him, but it didn't really work. But interestingly enough, a lot of people must not have liked him because no arrests were ever made. Can you imagine shooting a senator and dropping him? All right, I guess, let it slide. The next one is Kate Townsend. This is kind of interesting. She built this magnificent place, 3 stories high, decorated as a mini Versailles. Most magnificent brothel in the Western Hemisphere. Her apartment alone cost $40,000. You start figuring what that costs in today's money. That's an incredible amount of money. It was interesting, as I said, her wife of the guy one time went in because she figured her husband might be there, and she goes in dressed, I guess, as a man. And she discovers not only her husband, but the mayor and most of the city council. So she ends up kind of tough, too. Kate ends up being stabbed to death by her fancy man, her pimp. Most of these ladies, madams, had men that they would support. It's a relationship I still don't understand, but it's still a dominant relationship. So finally, we come up to Ordinance 16.02. Councilman Sidney Story stumbled on an idea that sins of the flesh are inevitable. He recognizes the oldest profession, you're not going to stamp it out. So in which case he decided if you can't make it legal because it's against the law. So why don't we set aside a certain area and just not enforce the law, but then vigorously enforce the law everywhere else. And it kind of forces everybody into one particular area. So as a result, with the exception of these boundaries, this is primarily an African-American neighborhood. It's now called, well, it was then called Treme as well. He ended up was legalized for non-enforcement of prostitution, and they called it the district. And that was the whole point. Now, they still played off the police. They put money in little bags on the steps, and the cops, at the end of a Friday night, would come in with their pockets bulging with coins. But still, but for the most part, it was left alone, okay, to do what they wanted. On January 29th, 1897, they adopted the ordinance and went into effect. A year later, on January 1898, it established the district. People immediately started investing in the district. By the time, one individual named Tom Anderson, who for 20 years was a state representative. Tom Anderson's was one of the biggest bars, as you saw right at the corner there. He bought it before this date, so evidently you think he had some inside information like that? That was the thought. So anyway, the district was established, and Paul Councilman Story used to call it Storyville, which didn't thrill him in the least. That wasn't his intention, but that's the name that stuck with it later on. Actually, within the district, it was called the district, but outsiders would reference it as Storyville. So here you have the original ordinance that established it, setting up the city will segregate the area to a new system. And a separate issue was set up in 1917, a special district for black prostitutes. That's right around where the city hall is presently. There's some question about that, because some say it was set up, some records indicate it wasn't set up. But if you read the biographies of Louis Armstrong, if you read about different people in the area, it was there. Whether it was officially saying the baby dolls, that's what I was saying. It was there. It was definitely there. It was definitely in full operation. This gentleman, George LaHoste, decided to file suit because he owned a house there. And he says, my God, you're turning this thing into a den of iniquity. What's my property value going to be worth? So he filed suit. Actually, his property value was worth twice what he paid for it. He wasn't clued in. All he saw was his neighborhood deteriorating. So he goes to court, files suit, and of course he loses because all the politicians, all the powers that be want the district. So here it is. This is kind of a blurry picture. This is an old picture. So you see it's in Iberville Basin, St. Louis, and North Robertson. So here's the, it was the Carondelet Canal in the basin that the Basin Street gets named after. And this is the district. Another view of it here, you can get a view from the French Quarter, so it's back of the quarter, Storyville. The swamp was back up in this area here. Gallatin Street was over here. So this is an area they set aside, it's quite large. This was the area again showing Storyville. This is St. Louis number 1, St. Louis number 2. And these are the area that's set aside. And this is that other district, the Uptown District, the Black District. Interesting dynamic, we'll talk a little bit later on, but at this time you have miscegenation, which is Jim Crowism and segregation. Miscegenation was a law saying you couldn't have sexual relations between African Americans and whites, but this was reserved for white clients, this was reserved for black clients, but you had a lot of octoroons and high-yellows and all the terms they used at that time for people of mixed background operating out here. Lulu White in particular, was proud of her collection of young ladies. Different backgrounds. So it's kind of an interesting contrast that you can have laws like that. Yet, nothing apparently was enforced, in Storyville. This is another map showing the layout of the district. So you have Basin Street. What you have here is the railroad that comes down here. It makes a turn on Basin Street. Eventually there'll be a train station. They'll build it in 1908. I'll show you a picture of it. The advantage here is that it comes right through Storyville and it stops right here. And as the customers are getting off, the girls are lined up here, waving at everybody and enticing people to come in. And of course, we've got such a great reputation, if you want to call it that, throughout the country, that people would come particularly to go to Storyville, and you really couldn't miss it. You didn't have to ask, where's Storyville? You landed right there. This is showing the collection of some of the Bordellos. But you see this little group right here are the famous ones. This is Mahogany Hall. This is Tom Anderson's place. Lulu White's, all of these areas. I'll show you some more pictures of that. Storyville, there was not just brothels. There were a lot of other businesses functioning in there as well. You had dance clubs, honky-tonks, music clubs, rooming houses, every sort of entertainment. I'll get into it a little bit talking about jazz. People say jazz started in Storyville. No, jazz way predates Storyville. And it didn't begin in the brothels. The only thing you had in the brothels were piano players, people like Jelly Roll Morton or Tony Jackson. Where jazz is in the clubs, the dance clubs, the honky-tonks and all that. Because after the gentlemen would go into the brothels, it wouldn't be there that long, right? Nobody lasts too long. So anyway, reality knocks on the door. So they drift to the back of town and start partying and drinking and dancing and just having a good time. And that's where your jazz musicians would get together and play. It's at this time that Louis Armstrong is just a young boy, and he's delivering coal to the cribs. We'll get into that a little later on. He's hearing the music, especially of King Oliver and these different individuals that are influencing him. He's got a great, interesting story. If you read his Louis Armstrong's New Orleans, it's kind of his biography in New Orleans. It's a tough life. Become a sort of adult Disneyland. I think that would be a way of putting it, more like Fantasyland. Busy season coincided, obviously, with the track. the racetrack, so once that opened up, and my mother told my grandfather, the racetrack came, everybody took their stockades off and threw them in the middle of the track. That was a symbol of the end of wearing a stockade. So, I mean, the track was very, very big in New Orleans, and obviously it associated closely with the people coming down to celebrate and celebrate. Storyville occupied 16 blocks, living in its own world, so here you have it. So here you have, you know, I love this, a Cross store. It's actually a shooting gallery for shooting guns. But this is straight here. This is Foucault's store, F-A-U-C-O-L-T-S. The girls operating in Storyville bought all their clothes from Foucault's, so they called it Few Clothes. And here you have Tom Anderson, Dylan Bird, Jesse Arlington, Minnie White, Mahogany Hall, Lulu White, Frank Early. This is this is where the rich went. These were the big mansions. Then sprinkled around, you had here Willie Piazza. But if you look around, you find all different types of places, bars and pool, dog cafe, Frenchman Saloon. Frenchman Saloons where a lot of jazz was played. You know, the Jackson, the Rice Cafe. So people just moved around. Oh, here you got Tulane Medical College. I thought that was rather interesting. Of course, they probably needed it, considering everything. And this corner here, where this is actually, this is the cemetery. Over here again, this is another view. This lists all the different places. This is an aerial shot. It's kind of blurry. I guess they did it with a balloon. I don't know. I didn't know an airplane. This is actually later, when you get around 1810 or so, because you see the sheds. Originally, the tracks came through, but there weren't any sheds. Later, when the Southern Railroad builds its station over here, it puts sheds so you don't get out in the rain. And this here is, you know, Lulu White's and the Mahogany Hall right there. So it's right across the street. Notorious Storyville mansions. Again, a blurry picture. This is Tom Anderson's. I have some better pictures. But I put this one up because it's old, because again, you don't see the sheds. So this is very old, and you can see just a train right there. This is the train station that was built. It was right on Canal Street, if you can imagine that, in Basin. The trains pulled up right to the back of it, and the sheds were behind it. This is again before the sheds were built, after the train station was built. Here again are the brothels along the edge here. So you can see if you pull up, you just stumble across the street. And in fact, you know, one of the accounts I read was a young engineer who said he couldn't wait till Friday when he got paid. As soon as he got paid, he stopped the train, jumped off, ran in there, came out 2 days later, dead broke, and went back to training. This is a color shot, which is pretty good, because here you see the sheds, and here you see the train station, and here's Tom Anderson's, and then you can see Mahogany Hall, and you know, the Arlington and all that. These are magnificent homes, by the way. And it's a shame the way that they were torn down. Can you imagine what a tourist attraction that would be? Let's just explain, this is Basin Street, Josie Arlington's, Tom Anderson. Josie Arlington and Tom Anderson had a thing going for a while there. Tom Anderson had a thing going, a number of women for a while there. You know, he was considered, he was, like I said, a 20-year member of the legislature, and he called him the mayor of Storyville. You know, he basically settled everything. If there was an issue of any kind, Anderson would handle it personally, so it kind of kept the police at bay. Gross. Ta-da. So this again, this is the list of Tom Anderson's, Hilda Burt's. These are the main, they call them the mansions as they were operating. And you have Basin, the Flo Meeker, that owned by Tom Anderson, surprising. The French house, it's an octarine and window mines. The women used to, I don't want to get into too much, but they used to, let's say, mime certain activities in the windows for the guys in the train coming up to draw people in. They would wear, you know, various amounts of clothes or not to try to entice customers to come into the doors. Antonio Gonzalez had a little annex. Minnie White from 1907 to 1917. Grace Simpson. Tom Anderson built this one for Josie Arlington, at the time his girlfriend. It was a large Rococo mansion. Then you had Pearl Knight, his first owner, famous mahogany owned by Lulu White, who was a woman of color, you know. And then you had this one here, very strange, you know, Emma Johnson decided that she could make more money rather than having sex, just having sex shows, so she did what she called her sex circuses. God only knows. Here's another view. This is a color shack, which I thought was fascinating. As you can see, these are beautiful homes. And they were all bulldozed because they wanted to expunge any record of the experience. It was kind of like monuments. Girls in these houses made about $10 a trip. And I'll get into the math, it sounds like, oh my God, that's terrible. When you look at the numbers, it's kind of interesting for the time. This is a poster. I'd love to get my hands on this thing. I took that picture at Rockies. And it's a Storyville. I said, are you kidding me? You know, but it has a list. These are all the names of all of the main brothels, the main mansions, and just a kind of a sketch of it. I thought that was really neat. Can't find it anywhere. You had the high-class places that people went to, but then you had the cribs, and this was really the sad side of town. Located to the back of Storyville, there were small rooms containing basically a bed and a chair, maybe 7 feet by 10 to 12 feet. The girls hung out the door, whatever they could, to try to cross to someone, wearing very little or nothing. I mean, Louis Armstrong talks about bringing coal to the area, and he comments that, you know, that he was, of course, he was a young boy, 16 years old, exposed to this, so he didn't mind taking it in. But he always said that some of the girls were so young, they should have been home with their parents. So it's sad. They received 50 cents to $1 a client, but they would make $200 a week.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. It's just tough. I mean, if you read the account of one of the girls that was there, she was there for about 2 or 3 months, and she said she was just physically worn out. She had to just escape. Now, she actually, they couldn't get out of there easy. She had to just sneak out through the kitchen one night, jump on a train to get out of town, because they weren't really inclined to let you leave. This was the seamy side, and it was also the Greater Health Challenge. This is where you had two main things, syphilis and gonorrhea at the time, syphilis especially. And the woman who most worked in this area. This is some of the cribs. You can see them right here. There's the doors. There's another view. This is after 1917 when they were closed. You see they've shut, we couldn't run doors crossing. But that's how close together they were. So they would run them. The girls didn't own them. What they'd do is usually there was a bartender at a bar who controlled them, and he had a board with keys hanging on a hook, and the girls would rent the room for $1 a night. And whatever they made was theirs, but they'd have to pay them $1 a night, and the next morning bring them back to keep. This is some more of them. So it's really sordid, sad. The Blue Book. I'm sure you've heard about the Blue Book. What happened is, because of the mix of all the different groups and different types of people there, a lot of clients were coming in, going into the wrong places, and having their heads stove in, and their wallets lifted. So Tom Anderson decided something had to be done about it. I love that. Evil be to him who thinks evil. That was the slogan, you know, for the Blue Book. It was published by Billy Struve and Tom Anderson. And what he decided to do was set out a book, hopefully so that people coming in would go to the places in the book and advertised in the book, but they would guarantee some sense of safety. Like, you're not going to get killed in here. It's, you know, it's more of a respectable place. It was first released in 1896, published continually from 1909 to 1915, and they put it in different locations, but mostly, surprisingly, at the train station. You know? Imagine that. Cost 25 cents, and it listed all the major, I love that. They were called sporting houses. It's sport. Kind of reminds you of, what am I thinking of? Yeah. It listed all the services offered, and many of the names of the lady of the evening. And the idea was to protect, as I said, sporting men from abuse. This is the Blue Book. Tom Anderson, of course, on the back cover, he's going to take full credit for it, so that's his ad. Excellent entertainment, dancing 9 till question mark. Usually the clubs, the girls would leave the brothels and start hitting the clubs at 4 in the morning. You know, so they would get up somewhere around 11 or 12 in the afternoon. So it was a different life, should we say. Here's Mahogany Hall. Miss Lulu White desires to inform patrons of the new Mahogany Hall. The original one burned down, so she had to move the Tom Anderson throughout, so she rebuilt it. When she rebuilt it, then she came up with it. Mums, Red Top, White Seal. These are the different champagnes. This is Tom Anderson. I love this. Representative lives 122 North Rampart. He also had a restaurant in Rampart. Is a merchant, real estate owner, owns considerable property in New Orleans. Yeah, Storyville. Yeah, again, a great friendly young man trying to better his condition. Is a staunch Democrat. Is a member of various Democratic clubs. Very active in New Orleans politics. That's one way he kept himself and his games alive. And he was in the legislature for 20 years. This is Anderson's Annex. The W here represents white girls. Okay? When you get to some of the other ones, you see women of color and then white. It's called the Tenderloin District. You can't afford to pass it up. You know, it says right there.
This is some of the books must not be mailed. I thought that was interesting. Friends probably said, no, we can keep that home in New Orleans. So New Orleans did have such a terrible reputation anyway. The names of the Storyville 400, I always thought that was interesting. Like, did they have like a certain group, you know, that, I don't know. This is Josie Anderson, this is Mahogany Hall. Emma Johnson, this is the first place, and she had an annex to it, that's where she had her circuses. This is Josie Arlington's phone, 1-888, so they had telephones. Wonderful originality, everything that goes fit out of mansion makes it the most attractive ever seen in this and the old country. Recently went to expenses nearly $5,000. I think $5,000 then is about $120,000 today. So she put a lot of money into that. And they had it. One of the madams actually made so much money when Hollywood started up, she decided to go into the business, so she took her fancy man, I think in college. She gave him money to open up a studio, thinking that she could trust him. He walked off with about $60,000 in cash back then, and she just never heard from him again. I can't imagine, you know, what happened there. This is Minnie Cook. Would be incomplete with a Minnie Cook. She's everything that one desires. Interesting. Name often tells the tale of a young woman any man would like to call a second time. So these are the girls. Inside the houses, the girls worked a variety of environments. It said some worked in the cribs, and the cribs were the cheapest places. You saw that small rooms. The next you had the expensive houses, high quality. Then the last you had the mansions, which were pleasure palaces. They spent a lot of money. This would be the inside of one of the mansions set up. The hallway going up to the top. You had this where the apartments were. Each room in these places had both a bedroom and an adjoining bath. So they were pretty much onto hygiene. They were worried about diseases. This is the inside, so you can see they were pretty well acquainted. Some of them were absolutely gauche. Like that. I mean, everything is just curtains and drapes and embroidery and all this stuff. But they had the ubiquitous piano. This is where the term professor comes from, the fact that every black musician that played the piano was referred to as professor, like Professor Longhair, Professor Morton. They gave them the name piano player. The piano players that name. They played ragtime. What they would do is they would play piano, and the girls would sing along, and it would just be a party, everybody drinking. If you found a girl you were interested in, the girls were usually dressed in these places in evening gowns, and then you just go up the staircase upstairs, and then come back down. A lot of times you just continue partying or drift into the back of town. Most of these people stayed in this area because they knew the back of town was pretty dangerous. We'll get into some of the jazz later on. So this is the inside, this is some of the pool tables. This is one of the boudoirs, one of the more opulent places. The ladies of Storyville, there were 2,000 to 3,000 women working in the district. And they were white, colored, mulatto, octoroon, that's how they were described in the Blue Book. They were French, Oriental, from South America. And some of them weren't, they just said they were. But nobody questioned them. I am French. Okay. He's from France, right up the Blue Book. Many were from small towns and rural areas. And this is where it gets kind of sad, because a lot of girls in these rural areas, they just wanted out of where they were, a small town. When it comes to New Orleans, and you still have it now, at the train stations and the bus stations, they call them chicken hawks. But as girls would come into town, and the madams would hang out at the train station, because they could spot them. When a young girl came in with a suitcase, and you could see this innocent, bewildered look the first time in a big city, she'd walk up to her, befriend her, take her out, know she's hungry, give her something to eat, talk to her, befriend her, and then give her a card and say, look, if you're running some hard times and need some help, you just come see me, okay? I'll take care of you. And just let her run. And eventually the girl would have a hard time because she didn't fit in, she didn't know what was going on. She'd go to her friend who would put her to work in a brothel. Some were children of the born of the prostitutes themselves. This would be later on, where the girls would have children. They'd usually try to prevent it. But if they had children, the boys would grow up and they would be put to work, physical labor somewhere around it. The girls would be groomed to be prostitutes as well. So it's a very sad situation when you look at that. Some were unfortunate, as I said, fell into moral judgment, where they were in their hometown. One girl in particular, she was supposed to get married to a gentleman that she knew there would be a scandal that she tried to marry him because she had a past. It wasn't anything big that she did, but the moral constraints were so tight that she fled to New Orleans and she ended up, in Lulu White's. Number entered the trade from the cribs and worked their way into the better houses. That was kind of rare because there were concerns about disease. This is Ernest Bullock. He was an interesting guy. He was short, hydrocephalic. He was a photographer, commercial photographer. And he was an interesting guy. He was short, hydrocephalic. He was a photographer, commercial photographer. And he was We don't know exactly what motivated him to do it, but he went into Storyville and started photographing the girls there. These are the only records we have, even the records of the buildings, the insides were all that are done by him. And he took the photographs. I believe his brother was a priest. He died, and when his brother went to the house, he found these boxes of all these glass negatives. There were 88 of them. And he started looking through them. He was shocked, because in his world that was pornography. But he had another friend who was a photographer who saw it, recognized the value. This is in the 1960s. And they brought it to New York. The other photographer developed everything, and they had a big showing at the Metropolitan Art Museum. You know, but this is the pictures, the collections that he did. They estimate, I think it was somewhere around 1911, 1912. I'm really not sure, because it was all done quietly. Nobody knew he was doing these things. And some refer to him as the Toulouse-Lautrec of Storyville, because he was a short, little, peculiar guy, you know, but he was a gifted photographer. This is Lulu White and her girls. This is Lulu White here. And this is, again, going into some of the girls that you can see, you know, they're women of color. And we talked about the fact that even though your Jim Crow laws about miscegenation, you know, it didn't affect the activities in Storyville. This is some of the pictures that Bullock took. I edited out a lot. Hey, if you want to see them. But for the most part, though, he was very tender with them. It wasn't like pornographic. They never been nude, but he took them like nude in gentle poses, you know, feminine poses. It wasn't anything like you'd think. This is just a collection of girls just sitting down. I think that's why they're enamored of him. And also they seem to find in a lot of the pictures the girls had the same pennant on. Like you would ask them to wear this pennant and he took the picture. So the dynamic of what was taking place there is something we'll never know. But there was something, relationship he had with them. Well, he was a misfit, so he didn't fit into society. I'm sure they were too. So they found this, I guess it's identity between the two of them. This is again some of the other girls. This girl here, he just set an ironing board up and asked her to put on the dog, fully dressed. Took a picture of her. This is the loosest I got. But you can see some of them are all dressed up in their finest, you know. Can't imagine that. This is the two sides. This is, you know, yes, Mademoiselle Vita Walker. And of course the other side is the crib girl. So this is the yin and the yang, the two sides of the equation. I love this one. Good for one. What? Inquiring minds want to know. That's Emma Johnson. Okay, we know her name. So maybe just the answer. This is the darker side of it. So these are the girls that are beaten. You know, these are the ones that are arrested. A lot of times they would fight amongst themselves, and more often than not, it was over a pill. You know, guy would be running 2 or 3 girls, and girls would know about it and find out they'd get into a brutal fight. They'd make all this money, and they'd just give it to their family. Yeah. Parlor games, you know, being, talking, dancing, listening to music, and getting drunk and having your wallet lifted. I love this. This could have been Tommy. Tommy Anderson's bar had 100 light bulbs in the ceiling. Can you imagine that? You know, he had that thing lit up. And this is, you know, the time when he didn't have a lot of electricity. But look at the cops and politicians in this bar. Nothing's changing up in city. This is a wild night in the district. You know, there was a thing on CNBC, the business channel, about high-class call girls. And it was interesting, because they were interviewing some of them, and this kind of picture almost shows some of that. They were saying, you know, a lot of people think it's about sex, and more often it's not. These big executives that pick these call girls, all they want is somebody to talk to. They can't talk to their wives, they can't talk to their family, it's almost like a confessor. It's just sometimes they won't even have sex. They'll just sit down, have some drinks, and talk. And you see, I think a lot of that probably taking place here. It's just companionship. I'm not saying that's the rule, but that's the case. So they're playing cards and just enjoying one another's company. Profitable? With 2,000 prostitutes working every week, the average $70 a week for tricks, that's cribs and fancy houses if you mix it up, $140,000 per week for Storyville and sex alone. 40 leading parlor houses bought $350 worth of alcohol a week, sold at 400% profit, which brought in $1,400. The rest of Storyville clubs, honky-tonk stand stalls did likewise for another $1,400. 70 professional gamblers brought in $15,000. They fleeced everybody that walked in. So the average Storyville week was 250,000 plus, or in today's money, $6,614,000. It was a moneymaker. Price of prostitution, converting to now 10 cents, was $2.38. $1 was $23.84. $10 was $238. Tremendous increase in STDs, syphilis, and gonorrhea. There were no cures back then. They used to use mercury. Can you imagine that? Now we get into jazz. We got to talk about jazz because it's tied. Jazz began before Storyville, but Storyville acted as a crucible where the jazz music, the musicians would meet, and they would play together. Most of the jazz was on the street groups walking around like we had second line groups and all that. But this gave them venues, the honky tonks and the clubs and things like that gave them an opportunity to play. I love this, jazz. I said there's another term, but sometimes I equated the two together. This was a cartoon, the jazz players, and all the people covering their ears and screaming and running away. I love the Times-Picayune on jazz, as they called it then. Why is this jazz music and therefore this jazz band? All well asked, why is the dime novel or the grease-dripping donut? All the manifestations of the low-streaking man's face that has not yet come out in civilized wash. Isn't it great? The fact, we just had a jazz fest, right? You think that's still pretty well? The fact is, however, there are many mansions in the house of the muses. In the house there is, however, another apartment, properly speaking, down in the basement, a kind of service quarters. Hall of Rhythm. So that's how little they viewed the jazz at the time. But music, in 1910, there were almost 200 houses of pleasure in Storyville, as well as clubs and nightclubs and things of the sort. That's by a jazz man. 101 Ranch was a place that employed jazz musicians. He wasn't born, but he came after that, Johnny Wiggs. He developed a kind of jazz performer. It's a pianist. Johnny Martin and Tony Jackson. We'll get a little bit more into Tony Jackson. He's interesting. They played in the parlor. The girls would be singing alongside them. They made $15 to $18 a day, which is about $350 to $429 a night playing piano. You know, they had the gig where they made the money. Jazz began in the dance halls. It was flourishing afterwards in the back places. Ferdinand, they called him Ferd, Jelly Roll Morton, Buddy Bolton, Tony Jackson, Edward King Oray, Papa Oscar Celestine, Manuel Manetta, Joe King Oliver. Joe King Oliver had a band. He left and went to Chicago. The band he was with, he was a cornet player, needed a cornet player, and that's when he got Louis Armstrong, who was a young kid, but very gifted, off of a coal truck that he was selling coal in the cribs to start playing with, and that was his origins. He played, this is kind of after jazz, Storyville closes, he ends up on the riverboats with the band, and he ends up going up to meet with Joe King Oliver in Chicago, and that's where his career is built from that point on. It's a fascinating story about the man. Sidney Bechet was one of the most gifted cornet players. Louis Armstrong always said he was the best. And of course, there was Satchmo. Anybody know where the name Satchmo came from? Satchel Mouth. That's right. That's his nickname. There's Professor Ferdinand Jelly Roll Morton. This is a page from the famous Blue Book. Professor Tony Jackson was gifted. At the age of 7, he was in his backyard and he assembled what was basically a little harp, like a harpsichord that he played. He played so well that his mother started realizing he had talent. She wanted a piano for him. So she started taking in wash from a certain house that had a piano so he could play. By the age of 15, he was one of the most accomplished pianists in the city of New Orleans. As he rose to fame, they said he could sing anywhere from tenor to soprano, and he could play any music you could imagine, from symphonic music to opera to ragtime to you name it, he could play it. And once he played a song, he never forgot it. He had an absolutely beautiful voice. Here he is here. Interesting thing about him, he was openly gay. So imagine being an openly gay black man in this period of time. So he had it tough, but then everybody loved him because he was so incredibly talented. They said that if a bunch of piano players was in a bar and Tony Jackson came in, if the piano player didn't get up and get away from the stool or Tony play, everybody in the place would say, man, you insulted the piano, okay? Get up and let the man play. So he was very gifted. He also ended up going to Chicago, but sadly died at around the age of his 30s. We're not sure. He was pretty heavy into alcohol. I guess the tragedy of his life made life difficult for him. This is Frank Early's My Place Saloon. Tony Jackson lived for a while upstairs. This is the type of saloons and bars that the guys, all the jazz players played in. This is interesting. This is some of the street music. He wrote a lot of music. Pretty Baby was one of his most famous ones. And here, I think it's kind of interesting to have this cover on it because it actually was written for his male lover. But they decided they couldn't market that. So this is what they went with. This is just some pictures of some of the bands together. This is King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, 1921. That's right before he leaves the city and goes to Chicago. Johnny Dodd. San Jacinto's Dance Hall Band in Storyville. So this is the way it was played. This guy, King Oliver, they said he was so great that when he walked up to play, he would open up the window, lean out the window in Storyville, and blast as loud as he could. And people from the French Quarter would hear his, oh, that's Oliver, and they'd all run into the club. It was like a calling the lambs in. You know, he was just an amazing guy. This is Buddy Bolton's band. This is Louis Armstrong. It's a young Louis Armstrong. This is Basin Street Blues. It was composed after Storyville closed, and it's an interesting tune. I was going to play it, but we don't really have time to play a lot of music. But if you get a chance, these are the different labels. It was done on the Columbia, OK, and his master's voice, RKO. This is sheet music. Storyville's last days. What happens is, this is some cartoon saying it's looted and abandoned. What happens is moral attitudes started changing. You know, the numbers of prostitutes dropped. At one point you had down to several hundred, from 3,000 to 4,000. The scourge of STDs had started taking its toll. People really panicked about that. So before it was killed by the federal government, it was winding down. American women were becoming more liberated and less constrained by the strict moral codes that predated before. Young men and women soon found comfort in one another's arms, and as a consequence, guys were less inclined to push off, or, as one man said, "Them country club girls put me out of business." The Secretary of War, what happened, 4 soldiers came into New Orleans. This is now 1917. This is when we're in the war, World War I. 4 soldiers came into town. What actually happened? More than 4 soldiers came into town, but this particular 4 got into a situation on Storyville where they were killed. As a result, the military decided to work in conjunction with the American Social Hygiene Organization to have Storyville shut down. Secretary of Navy Josephus Daniels has responded to the death of these soldiers by putting pressure to the federal government on the local authorities. These boys are going to France. I want them adequately armed and clothed by the government, but I want them to have an invisible armor to take with them, a moral and intellectual armor for their overseas. They demanded that it be closed because it was a bad influence. It was within 5 miles of the military base. Like, they don't have prostitutes within 5 miles of the military base. But as Governor Martin Berman said, you can make it illegal, but you can't make it unpopular. But nevertheless, he fought. He went to Washington and said, "You've got to be kidding me. You know, we can keep this thing going. There's things we can do." And the government says, "No, you're going to shut it down." So it was. Storyville was officially closed November 14th, 1917 at midnight. God only knows what those last hours were like. It must have been crazy up in that place. This here is illegal debates ends, round up in the Vegas to follow the closing of Storyville. Some prostitution continued, but now they were enforcing it. Eventually, over time, they started shutting down the dance halls. If you read Louis Armstrong's book, you'll find that, you know, he loved playing his cornet, but he ended up going back to selling coal because all the clubs were being shut down for different pretenses, and there was no place to play music anymore. You know, it was just gone. So the attraction was gone, that centerpiece, the tourists coming in that they all depended upon were all still carrying around the city, but not like it was here. It was demolished until 1920. Some of the clubs and dance halls, as I said, continued. The laws were enforced. In the 1930s, they demolished everything, which is sad because, like you saw that color picture, some of these houses are absolutely magnificent, including the great mansions, which are some of the grandest in the city of New Orleans. Public housing project replaced them. Originally, it was built for soldiers and for their families. But in 1937, the Wagner Act was set up housing for the poor, and then became the Iberville Housing Project. It was the 3rd built in the city of New Orleans. This is the rest remaining after it's been abandoned and instead of to be knocked down. This is an aerial shot of the project. So you can really see this is
Basin Street here, it occupies all of Storyville. All of it. You know, they just knocked the whole thing down and built the project there. This is another aerial view, so you can see here's Christ. You know, I guess Few Clothes was right around here. And this is the last building, actually, that was part of the original Storyville. It's one story now, it was two-story, a little bit tall. It was one of the bars. This is a picture taken in the 50s, I believe. More recent. This is that building I was telling you about. That's the last remnant of what was originally Storyville. And this is a picture taken by a lady standing at the exact spot where I think Tom Anderson was. So Tom Anderson was right here, and this was the string of the brothels, and this was the railroad track where she's standing on Basin Street. It's an interesting shot. And of course here, Storyville, this historical plaque, closed in 1917. Famous legalized red light district was in this area, and we had great musicians, King Oliver, Jelly Roll, Walt Lewis Armstrong, Tony Jackson, and Jimmy. And this is just a list here. If you go to YouTube, you can find all this great music. You know, sadly, there's nothing by Tony Jackson that we recorded, but Jelly Roll Walt has some. So thank you. If you have any questions, I can't promise I can answer them, but I can try.
Ron,
Yes?
I had read that the priest brother of Belloc had etched out the faces of the women on the glass plates. Is that true?
Wait, I couldn't really hear you, what?
So the photographer Belloc,
Yeah.
that his brother, the priest, had etched out.
I'm not sure if he did it or Bullock did it, but yes, not all, but some of the faces are scratched out. And we don't know who did it or why. Why? Probably because he didn't want the girls' faces out there, whether they were known or within the city or what. But it is interesting, because even because if you get Bullock's book, which was it's an old book, it's a collection, it doesn't have all 88 prints in it. I wish he did. But on some of them, you see where the faces are scratched out, and it's a question of who did it. I think they think Bullock did it, from some of the things I've read. So maybe he just, for some reason, decided that he was going to protect her identity. That's not all. Anybody else? I'm sorry, I'm saying another question, follow
No.
up? Okay. Wait, we have a gentleman there. Yes, sir.
Yes, two questions if I may. Is there any documentation related to the area that was segregated as relates to the black race?
Not too much that I've found. I was focused on Storyville, so I didn't do any in-depth digging on it. I guess if you went to the newspaper archives, you dug through the Historic New Orleans collection, you might find something. But it seems like it was more informal in the sense that they didn't, the legislation to pass it was in February 1917, which was after all this was kind of done. And I don't think it went through, but it existed way before that, because that's the area Louis Armstrong grew up in, Liberty Street. And he talks about the cribs, he talks about the environment he grew up in throughout his book, so it was definitely there. In fact, that's what the whole thing with the baby dolls were. The baby dolls got all decked out for Mardi Gras as a challenge to the girls uptown. And in fact, one time, there was a party, one of the madams threw in one of the clubs, and one of the leading madams in the black district turned to, because they're all in the protection of the cops, right? They paid the cops off. So she asked them, she says, let me tell you, they got a party going. Can we go? The guy goes, well, it's a public place. I guess you can. These girls spent their money, decked themselves out, and crashed the party in Storyville and had a wild time, having a great time, and just basically showed everybody down. So apparently it did exist. But how much evidence we have would probably be more anecdotal in that regard.
And if I may, the Johns of Storyville, were they a white?
Yeah, oh yeah, you had to be. African-American males were not allowed in Storyville, except like, even Louis Armstrong mentions that when he goes there to work, he wears his short pants, and he's glad to be able to work with his white boss, because then he doesn't get hassled by the police. A black male walking through Storyville would be stopped and questioned. He didn't belong there, you know. You go in your area. Now, but I'm saying, you have the Jim Crow laws, you have the laws that got miscegenation and all this sort of stuff, but if you look at the list of Storyville, a lot of the girls are mixed blood. You know, they're black, white, and everything in between. And in fact, they advertise it, you know, so it's not like they're trying to keep it quiet. Yes? One more.
Did the larger houses have doctors on call? Was there?
That I don't know. I would imagine they probably did, only in the sense that if one of the girls got sick, they'd have somebody to go to. So I would imagine that would be the case. It just seems logical. There's no record of that. You know, but like, you know, the girl that escaped, that's what happened. She had a close friend that was there with her, and then the friend got syphilis and was dying. And then when she died, she decided, I'm getting out of here. But she realized she couldn't just leave, so she acted like everything was normal, quietly packed up a suitcase, hid it outside, and that night just walked downstairs like she was going to the kitchen, ran out the back door, grabbed the suitcase, had the time so the train would be leaving at the same time, ran on the train and got out of there. So apparently it wasn't easy to get out. But, you know, they did have a doctor, I'm sure, on call, because that was their main issue. That, and also pregnancy. I mean, the girls would become pregnant, they would have children, and the children would live there, you know. And that's particularly sad, because sometimes for the girls, at a very tender young age, they're not involved in intercourse, but they're, let's just say, aware of what's going on and somewhat tangentially involved in the activity. So they're kind of brought up in that environment and groomed, you know, for that role in life. Yes, ma'am?
Who were the architects of the houses in
You know, I have no idea. That's a great question, you know.
I heard that it's German architects, because the Germans own a lot of land.
Yeah, they did. So it wouldn't surprise me, you know, because I mean, the buildings were beautiful. If you look at it, that's what I'm saying. They're 4 stories high. You know, imagine back then, each bedroom having a bath. And some of these places like had 16 bedrooms. Well, obviously, I mean, it had one purpose in life. So, but you can imagine. But they had 4 and 5 parlors decorated into different motifs. So these were massive things, especially like Mahogany Hall in Arlington. Those were just massive places. Yes, sir.
The Hope was owner of a lumber yard, and my understanding is that he provided a lot of the lumber for those mansions. And I've also heard that one of the reasons he filed suit to end the legislation for the district was to expand it so that his home could be included so that he could make more money.
I didn't hear that, because the account I read was that his home was in it, and he didn't.
He was on the edge.
Yeah, he was on the edge? Okay. Well, I mean, supposedly Mayor Maestri sold furniture. Beds. Imagine. Well, thank you so much. I hope you found it a little entertaining.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us for the last lecture of the season. We will start up again in September. We'll get some information out to you probably sometime in August, and we hope to see you back with us. Have a nice summer.
Try to look dignified.
So what are we about to do?
We're about to do a lecture on Storyville, the seamy side of life in New Orleans.
Yeah, it's a real big crowd.
Right on the state line. And then
tonight, one of them being our Chancellor of the college, Dr. Tommy Warner, and I'm going to have him come up and say a few things before I introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Appreciate my introduction as usual. Well, first and foremost, thank you all for being here this evening. Once again, we have a great lecture for our lecture series season. And actually, as I recall, we have our 148th lecture. What do y'all think about that? 148. A little bit of the history, if you don't mind. I won't take too long, but 15 years ago, Dr. Manning, who is on the camera right now, so on the way out you might want to say hello to him, but he came to me and said something about, Doc, how about us putting on a history lecture series? Or just a story about something that's happened in the past. So thought about it for about 2 seconds and said, you're on. And believe me, it's been a real treat. I'm not up here for me tonight. I'm up here for him and other gentlemen who have really made this program what it is. So Dr. Manning doesn't want he doesn't want to come up here. He doesn't want me to talk about it and so forth. No, you do this. He stands in the background. But again, this was his genius, his thought. I don't know, Curtis, if we ever thought we'd do 148 and we'd get these kinds of receptions and so forth. But this is unique. Very few four-year institutions, that's Georgia, Tulane, LSU, and all, very few of them have this kind of a history lecture series. We are blessed to have Curtis Manning, and also with him tonight his sidekick and partner and all that.
Sancho Panza.
What?
Sancho Panza.
Well, I'll let Ryan take care of his business, but if y'all know him, you know, we used to have a guy, he was from UNO, and he gave it to me before, Ryan. It's Stephen Ambrose. Some of y'all might remember that name. We have 2 Stephen Ambroses right here at Nunez Community College. We are truly blessed. So, thank you for coming again. This is our 148th. If you don't get this, if we have any extras out there, you might get some printed. You ought to look at some of the topics, some tremendously interesting topics. Some very, very real, almost as they're happening, some in history and all that. So we're very proud to put this on. I'm blessed to have 2 great, outstanding history lectures teachers who do this. And we want to make sure that we recognize not only Ron and Curtis, but also Nick Sly, who's up in the booth, who does a great job for us in our theater program. How about Nick Sly? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Teresa Smith, who has helped us with this, and our own Michelle Minor. She's done a great job. So without further ado, we are extremely proud to have both of these gentlemen here today. One's going to be on the camera for a change, and the other one's going to tell you all about these bawdy stories that we have to go through tonight. Okay? Thank you all so much for being part of the Nunez History Lecture Series, and we hope that this is our last one for this season. Who knows, we might slip one in there during the summer if something comes up big time. Not another Katrina. I don't know if y'all remember that. We filled the place up after Katrina. But anyway, long story short, thank you all so much for being what I call in that number. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, just a few little announcements. Number one, Dr. Manning is filming this tonight so that he can add it to the website that he's worked on so thoroughly over the past, I don't know how many years, to get up and running for his Louisiana Institute of Higher Education. If you go on there, there are all of the Battle of New Orleans Historical Symposium lectures have been filmed, and they are on his website for that. But he's also included some old lectures from the History Lecture Series. And we're hoping to get some more of that done, but tonight's lecture is definitely going to be up there as soon as he can get it together and put it up there. You really want to check it out. It's lahighered.org, okay, if you get a chance to do that. If anybody's in the audience tonight that's new, welcome. And if you want to be part of our regular series and on our mailing list, there is a sign up at the back table. You can add your name. We prefer to send it by email because, of course, cost effectiveness, but we will send it by snail mail if you'd rather it that way, and we welcome new people on those lists all the time. Our lecturer this evening, Ron Chapman, is he's enigmatic and wonderful, and everybody loves him, as is evidenced by the size of our audience. His accolades run longer than my arm, and I'm not going to go into them because I include a lot of them in the program. Let's just suffice it to say that most of you came here tonight to see him. Of course, I'm sure the subject helped a little bit. We were thinking about ideas of how to get the auditorium filled, and since my Italian audience was so big, we might combine the Italians and Nixon, who knows? We'll see. But for right now, let me bring up Mr. Ron Chapman, who's, I'm sure, going to give you an exciting evening.